Hello and good morning. Right now it's about 20 after 11 here on the last day of our vacation out in Germany. I'm sitting here in the Swiss Alps. It's our quiet, relaxing day between having done everything we've done and going home. And we're going to catch an early train in the morning. So we get to just sit down. I get to read. I get to do videos like this. And I get to talk to you for a little bit. Now, one of the things that I had done was I had actually read a bunch of these splatter westerns in the past, and you'll see reviews for these. I'll even try to put some of the links down below later on after I get home. But I had three already ready to go for me to just take some notes on and give a review for you. And those three actually are right here. They are A Savage Breed, it is Red Station, and also Shadow of the Vulture. Now, what happens here is while I've been going from spot to spot within Germany, we take long train rides sometimes, like 2 to 3, 4 hours long. So I'm able to sit down on the train and actually take some physical notes on a pad because for some reason my laptop does not have the license for Excel that I usually use for my notes that I use at home. So I'm going low tech here today. I'm actually going to stand up the book here next to me while I talk to you while reading what I've handwritten as far as things to remember to say. Now, as I've said before, these splatter westerns are something I just kind of happened upon one day when I was searching for something else on eBay. And I tell you what, like I've said before, it's the genre I didn't know I was missing. And I'm reading these books and I'm pretty much enjoying them as I go along. There are a few here and there that aren't up to snuff in my opinion, and I'll let you know those when they happen. But, you know, I'm gonna read them all. I actually own almost all of them except for the brand new ones that have come out, so you'll hear me talk about it in some fashion. But what I'm going to do here today is going to be a little bit out of order from the ones I've read because I know I've already started notes on the Savage Breed at home, so I don't want to recreate that in my mind as I move forward. And I wasn't sure if I did anything with Red Station yet, so I went to the third one that I had read, which was this one here, Shadow of the Vulture. So Shadow of the Vulture was written by Regina Garza Mitchell. And this came out, just not that many years ago, because this whole genre came out for the most part in about 2020, like right in the midst of the pandemic. So a bunch of authors got together with with the Death's Head Press, and they decided to start releasing these, and they whip bang got them out one after the other. So, like I said, it's a great genre. I'm enjoying it very much. I've got plenty to read, and let me tell you about the newest one. So here we go. Again, Shadow of the Vulture. And let me try with my low tech here because I can't use my editing software. And I'll try to prop this baby up and leave it here the whole time for you. Get it a little bit over more. Bada boom. Here we go. All right, let's go up to it. And as you can see, when I do these videos, they're typically unedited as far as I go through the content. You're hearing it exactly as it's happening in life. Not that whole thing where someone talks and then their head's over here, and they talk the next sentence and it's back over here for another sentence. No, none of that stuff here. So this one here actually, let me pull it down for a second, is on the thinner side as far as even the splatter westerns are concerned. This one comes in at just shy of 100 pages and at a book price of about $11.99 it appears. So 100 pages for a person like me is something I can pretty much knock off in almost a day if I wanted to. Not even a full day, just actual having that much time to sit down and read all at once. But let me tell you about this one now. So this one here actually gives you a lot of the story perspectives in it because there's about three women that it follows. It's the female perspective. And they talk about, just in general, people want to talk about like authors and agency and what you actually see out there is generally like white male authors or whatever else. But those voices are heard from any other walk of life, any other race and nationality. They're all out there. So in the splatter western genre itself, this is the first installment of such a voice that I'm aware of. There could be others that I haven't read yet, but I'll see those when I come along. And it follows three women along the way, and I'll talk about at least two of them as I do this. Now, it's not even the first time that there's been a woman's voice being the protagonist of a book. In fact, the next one I'm going to do is going to be Red Station, and you do encounter that there as well. But like I said, there's a shotgun approach to the publications of all these books. So I think those two books, Red Station and Shadow of the Vulture, might have come around, within like a month or two of publication, which does not require that they were actually finished being written in that order either. One could have been written, Shadow of the Vulture could have been written far in advance of Red Station. Just Red Station got published first, for whatever the reason is that Death's Head Press decided to do it in that fashion. Um, and I've always joked too, where in some of the other books I've read before, you kind of like see characters pop up in each other's stories. Like the main character in Dust appears in two other books along the way. I think the Black Magpie from the Magpie Coffin, also makes an appearance somewhere else or is referenced somewhere else in another book. So I've always had that opinion that it's like, everyone's just sitting around a table, maybe drinking, playing cards or whatever else. And you're like, you know something? I could probably put your character in my book for a small little scene. Not extremely important for the book, but you love those Easter eggs every now and again. So I just see that happening with these writers talking to each other. And in fact, I think um, it might actually be in A Savage Breed where there's an epistolary where one of the characters that might have encountered the creatures in the book is given a name and is actually the name of an author of another book. So these guys are nodding to each other. I'm sorry, these authors are nodding to each other, left, right, and center. So um, I I find that enjoyable just to hear about it. So like I said, female agencies in these books is not a foreign concept. In this one, it's pretty much the sole point that you're going to go through. Um, sorry if I look at my notes for a second. So Shadow of the Vulture actually begins with the main woman, or what I believe is the main woman here, called Juana. And there is some form of Mexican war going on that she is passionate about and she wants to join. In fact, she even brings a friend of hers along, Annalisa, and they join the war together. And it's one of those wars that has a cause that Juana actually believes in. So her heart is totally in the fighting and the results that they want to come out at the other end of the battles. But unfortunately, in this first chapter, her best friend, Annalisa, does get hit in the face and she dies. And that just enrages Juana in such a way that she is almost overcome with a berserker rage and hits that battlefield pretty hard. Which, being a woman in battle, even the opposing um, combatants in the war are like, hey, what's this woman doing? And not noticing that she's coming after them to kill them. And even on her side of the battle, those warriors are like, listen, she's going, charge right in after her. And she kind of like leads this, which is pretty instrumental in them actually winning that battle that she's in right then and there. And, she's just taking this bloodlust with her with the loss of her best friend, her sister, kind of. Not exactly by blood, but, by soul. And they go in there, and when the dust settles, she actually sees almost like the ghost of her friend talking to her right then and there. And she's blinking her eyes, like, what the hell's going on here? And that becomes, a very big part of the story. As the chapters move on and she has more, we'll call it adventures, and the content just continues, she now always has her friend Annalisa and this recently dead looking version of her ghost as a companion during her travelogue. So Regina Mitchell, as an author, does a really good job of bringing the supernatural right to the forefront as soon as she can, which is, it just shows you that kind of genre that we're in, that we're here to see, we're here to read it. And as they continue, it's, Juana becomes like a bounty hunter. And you see that even her killing nature becomes more and more to the forefront. And you just know that this is, I don't want to say the wicked person, but this is the violent person who, when she needs to call upon it, will always be there and take care of whatever needs to be done, which does make its appearance a number of times throughout the rest of the book when her section is being written about. Now let me switch gears for a little bit and I'll talk about the second woman, whose name is Jovita. Now Jovita owns a farm. She's an older woman. They've been cattle ranching on there for her whole family for God knows how long. You don't even know how old exactly I think Jovita is herself. But they're right outside of the outskirts of a town called Soledad. And most of the town folk kind of they're wary of Jovita because they just believe that she's a witch, or as they say in Spanish, a bruja, and they give their stories as kind of like their examples, even though it never really happens to one of them directly too much. It's always they heard from a herd, or that one guy said this happened to him because of that. So for instance, they said, oh, she's a witch and she eats babies and she eats like the aborted fetuses of people that she's helped actually have abortions or something like that. And at one point, they think that she actually skinned a man alive and just raked her fingers over his flesh because he beat his wife. And that was the revenge for the wife. So she has that kind of temperament within her. They say that she hexes cattle and makes their milk spoiled, that if you tried to milk this cow, you'd have to pour out gallons and gallons before you realized nothing was going to happen with this milk to the good, and you just end up killing the cow. And she curses certain pregnant women who look at her cross-eyed or something like that. So people attest a lot to this woman. So she's given this background and this lore with which to build who she is. So anyway, she's got this farm with her family, and of course, the sheriff comes in and starts saying, you know something? We don't really have a record of you owning this farm. Like, there's nothing on paper here. Because usually when you were settling certain lands, you just settled the land and you tended it. But now the Americans are coming down into the Mexican land. And let's not forget, we know America today as the 50 states with Texas the way it is and everything else. But in the time, portions of Texas, New Mexico, and even up, as far as like Nevada and even to California was all just one big Mexico. So back in this time, we were just annexing land to make a bigger United States. And this is just another example of taking it from the people who actually owned it originally. So the sheriff comes in to say, hey, you know something? We don't know that you own the land as far as we're concerned. So, but we could probably put your name on a deed and you can keep the land, but it's going to cost you like about $250, which again, adjusting for inflation, that's a hell of a lot back then, especially for Mexican farmers and cattle ranchers. They don't just have that lying around. So the whole thing is a ploy. Oh, you're not going to come up with the money, therefore we're going to take the land from you and it'll be our land because we want it. And even if she was probably going to come up with the money, it probably would not have solved the issue. It would have been one of those things where it's like, oh, you know something, we forgot about something else, we need 250 on top of that. The land was going to go to the Americans that are coming down there by hook or by crook. And these two first stories that happen between Juana and Jovita kind of set the tone of what you're going to get throughout the rest of the book. There is a full-on whites stealing from the Mexicans. And this is a primary theme of much of the novel. Not to mention not just the stealing, but the actual harm caused to the Mexicans by Americans and white gringos coming through here. And some of the atrocities that actually happen through here are vividly written by Regina in pure splatter westerny fashion. There's stealing of the cattle by actually the ranchers on Jovita's cattle right there, and they just kill them. It's like, oh, prove that you own these cattle. Well, here it is. Bam. It's like just done. There's a scene where like there's two drunk Mexicans coming home one night after a bar, and of course they run into some whites, and it just goes really downhill really fast from there. Even the sheriff that went to go see Jovita and tried to bribe her with $250, which wouldn't have made a difference, he comes back, and now there's consequences against Jovita. Not even consequences. That's not the right word. There's atrocities done against Jovita, which actually take many, many paragraphs and a bunch of pages to go through in vivid detail what they're actually doing to her. And this is kind of where they put her story back together too, where as she's being beat on, she kind of curses them all at once. There's a bunch of them that are actually taking place that they're doing this to Jovita. So this witch's curse comes into effect as people leave and go back to their homes. And this is where, you know, the violence gets dialed up to a nine. Because now we're talking not only the physical violence, we're talking the psychological violence. I mean, tons of like nightmares and visions and people just imagining what's happening to their body while they're sleeping. Um, Tortures, everything else. It's it fits the genre wonderfully as far as what you're reading here. Now, overall, I did my best to try to keep it out. Oh, by the way, I know there's a third story follow another girl as well. I think she's like the granddaughter or whatever of Jovita, and and on that storyline, while it does have the most supernatural aspects towards it, I can say that with the 100 pages that I read, I honestly don't remember too much of it. And that's what I started to say a paragraph ago. It's one of those things that overall I tried to keep it out of my voice when I'm talking to you today. But, I wasn't much into this one, Shadow of the Vulture. It just didn't really have the punch to actually like bring it home that will be very memorable to me, you know. And I don't think it's one of those things. I'm pretty honest, I think, when I say this. That's not because the story had a lot of whites versus Mexicans, so therefore, I'm part of the aggressors. I can distance myself from that. My family itself came here in the early 1900s, well past any atrocities that have happened in the past. So I guess from my perspective, I can almost say it was those people that did it and not my people that did it. But, from here or there, it's just one of those things that those events and those scenes that were in here, very tragic and very well written as far as I'm concerned, it didn't meld together to actually tell a story unless the story's point was simply look at what we have experienced and have to overcome. Okay. And generally, those stories, you need more than 97 pages to tell a compelling version of that. Okay. It was almost as if it was, let me show you a bunch of situations that happened to some denizens of the area. And I'm just going to, kind of daisy chain them one after another. But as far as why you're seeing it as an example of an overarching story, I either missed it or it wasn't there or I didn't get it. So I'm not sure what to say about that exactly, but it's just one of those things where I actually am looking for the story. Show me the story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Even if you have multiple perspectives, usually it does follow that kind of thread along the way. There are other exceptions, of course, out there. Things like Cloud Atlas comes to mind. And if I had my software, I'd throw that book up here just so you can see the cover for it. But Cloud Atlas is like 7 to 9 novellas that occur over the course of the entire written novel. And all of them begin and get cut about halfway through or so. And then the next one picks up. So it takes stories from like the furthest in the past it goes to the furthest in the future it goes. But then that future story kind of is one whole story and then unravels to the endings of all the stories that happened before it. Now, one of the things that happens in this is there's a loose connection between all the stories as far as is it one story being told by another story? Is it a historical event that's going to take place in another future story's timeline as well? Or so be it. But even then, it's kind of like, that was the journey and it took a lot of pages to make that journey as well. I didn't get the sense of that journey in this one, so there was no beginning and end. So I personally, didn't get myself invested enough into it. Now, another thing that happens is if this is going to be a story regarding the lands of Mexico and its history, I personally am not aware how much of that history, I should have known to get into it. So with that, it's being removed far enough from the culture that when it was referenced in there, I didn't have a moment to place it in time. I didn't have oh yeah, I know that after this it becomes that. Like for instance, I was told one time, so I don't know personally, but was told a story that if you watch Braveheart, like the son, the girl that has his son, might end up signing or helping create the Magna Carta that happened afterwards. So like we're telling you these events here, but later on, if you follow the culture, you will find other events that happen after the fact. So I'm not sure how much of Shadow of the Vulture was meant to be historical versus just being a fictional novel. But I was removed enough from the culture that there weren't certain guideposts in the sand that I would have known how they fit together. Now, with the culture differences as well, one of the things that popped up in my mind as a comparison was, see, I'm a fan of The Walking Dead. In fact, before I watched the original TV show, my library actually had all the comic books in those big omnibus editions. So I read them all first and then watched the show. But of course, it got to be a popular show and it had its first spin-off, which was Fear the Walking Dead. So I was like, hey, if I like The Walking Dead, I'm definitely going to follow Fear the Walking Dead. So it's the best I can do, by the way, without my software in Austria with me. But Fear the Walking Dead, the first 3 seasons of this show actually were Southern California when the events kick off initially. And then the family that you're following, actually the families that you're following from there, tend to migrate south into Mexico in hopes of getting away from the more populated areas of California, let's say, and stay away and stay ahead of the zombie apocalypse. So now they're crossing into the border of Mexico and they're having their encounters and their adventures down there. And again, I had that removal from not only Mexico, but even Southern California in general, that I don't have any guideposts that I'm familiar with to help me move along the story and just say, oh, okay, they're there now. And now they're doing this. And I know this happened somewhere else and that's going to be the thing too. So it was just one of those things that not so much not my genre, but my ignorance is taking a forefront here and saying I'm out of my familiarity. So therefore, the story has to actually bring me into it for me to actually get imbued enough with what's going on. It's got to pull and get my attention. But unfortunately, my interest never quite got there, unfortunately. But that's what I'm saying, it was just I thought it was lacking just a true throughput story to actually have the good novel that I would have liked to have read. But, you know, I can't love everything I read, unfortunately. Now, one thing that they did do though is with the 3 women that you follow for the most part, they did do those connections to the spiritual, which, which by the way, with Shadow of the Vulture, that vulture and the spirituality in the book are very prevalent. And that aspect of the story is actually done pretty well as you see that third woman's journey take her along. So and besides the spiritual, it also delves into the realm of the supernatural as well, and portions that you read that have that are very interesting. Like I said, you know, didn't have that story along with it to actually imbue it enough for my taste. Now, I think I got one last thing here. Yeah, no, 2 last things. All right. The one thing is, and again, there's something about not being in that area where Spanish and English are commingled enough that there are certain buzzwords that if you write them in Spanish, you know exactly. Sorry, one more time. You know exactly what they mean. So, like I know personally that if they would call Jovita a bruja, the bruja is like a witch or voodoo queen, or however you want to say it in the English version. There's a supernatural aspect to that, and I think bruja is the female, and brujo might be the male version of it. But as you go through, there's even certain clothing that's mentioned in some of the sentences, and certain other aspects that were using, yeah, they were using Spanish words, but they weren't in my parlance, so I didn't know what they were. So now there's like 6 or 7 times I had to catch a word and actually pause my reading, pull out my phone, look up what it is, and try to figure out what it is. Some of the examples I found there were vaquera or baston, and someone wears a rebozo. It's just, I'm sure they're common enough if you live in a commingled English and Spanish area that you would actually have more and more, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Just that you'd have more exposure to this kind of language. Unfortunately, I'm an East Coast guy and almost Northeast East Coast, and it just wasn't a thing that I was familiar with, so I had to keep on referring back. So I do not take it away from Regina. I think that she probably put them in there exactly where they belonged, and it fit very well. But again, I was too far removed to actually like enjoy it in such a way. The only other thing, as far as like these splatter westerns are concerned, and I've actually mentioned this a number of times, is there's some editing that's missing in the actual working of the finished novels that come out. And I think they've gotten a little bit better as the timelines of subsequent novels have come out. Even though, like I said, actually I didn't say this in the video, but most of the novels, even if they have a character might jump in for an Easter egg here and there, are completely separate from one another. Like they may exist in the same universe, but you don't have to read, if you get the first 8 that were published, you don't have to read them 1 through 8. You can read them in any order you want. It almost doesn't make a difference, you know. Um, but a lot of the earlier ones, and I've had whole sections in other novels, especially Hunger on the Chisholm Trail, where there's like typos here and there, which just took me out. And I think this one actually did very well along the way. In fact, there's only one time I actually had to pause, where I think it was on page 22. There was like an extra long space in the middle of a sentence. Um, and it seemed like everything was usually like justified, right and left, so all the words fit in there. But I think it's something that happened that moved a sentence up one, and it might have had a tab or an enter to get from sentence one to sentence two, which has had this particularly long one on the top, which I know other words could have fit in there that happens subsequently. So, except for that one moment, I did not notice anything from like an editing perspective that stopped reading this book from page 1 to page 97. So I definitely give it some thumbs up on that side of the fence. And the last thing I'll say is, at the end of the day, I'm certainly not here trying to discourage anyone from picking up this novel and reading it themselves. It's somewhere along the lines of between to each his own to individual taste may vary. Hell, you might have some opinions on this novel that I just completely missed the boat on. Feel free to, let me know about it. I'm curious to see what's up. Like I said, I can always reread it too. Uh, Currently, I don't believe I will. It probably will just have its place on the bookshelf. But if I learn more about it, sure, I'll pick it up again and see what I missed. Might have to do a second video then if I've changed my mind too much. I probably did miss the boat on something along the way. That actually happened to me once before, I think, when I was watching the movie No Country for Old Men. And I know there's like 2 different storylines going on the whole time between like the old men and the actual action that's happening along the way, between like the man that finds the money and Anton Chigurh and the one cop trying to chase them out. But when that movie ended with just the cop and the old sheriff just talking, and it kind of went to black when they were done talking, I was like, they were just talking about memories of the past, maybe some even the good old days. But when that went to black, I was like, I know for a fact I missed the boat on something here. I was in it for the action and like the A story, but the B story, if I have A and B actually correct in order here, there was more going on there that I didn't pay attention to. And that might certainly have happened when I read Shadow of the Vulture. But like I said, if you're into this genre, by all means, make sure you pick up this along the way. You can borrow it from a friend, get it from the library, buy it from Amazon directly, whatever you got to do. I think that's all I have for today. I got you for about a half hour today, and I think it's time to start writing down my notes on my next train for the next one to be ready, which I'm pretty sure is going to be Red Station. In fact, I think I already have a couple pages written from my last train ride on this one. So let me leave you there. Okay, thanks for listening all the way to the end, and I'll see you here soon enough. Like I said, I've got these two ones already read that I'm just waiting to put out a video for before I finish my next one. Ta-ta.